God thunders. And when I was younger, much younger, I was probably maybe 5 or 6, I was not frightened of storms, but I certainly didn't like the thunder that would rock the dishes, you know. And sometimes out on the farm with no other things around, you get some pretty close lightning strikes and the house roars sometimes. And, you know, that was, you know, frightening for me. And so my grandmother, she lived on a farm out between Beulah and Sudan. And she said, "Oh, honey, just listen. That's God's talking to us." And I went, well, I never thought that God was talking to me through thunder. And, you know, from that point on, thunder never really bothered me that much. I got thinking, no, God's talking to me, so I can listen to God talk. But also, he brings clouds to water his earth and to show his love. Isn't that wonderful? To show his love. And boy, don't farmers understand God's love when they're trying to grow the crops that feed the nation and feed the world. How wonderful it is. God brings them that water to the earth. Here's what God says: I sent rain on one town, but withheld it from another. Does that ever happen in Amos? That's what we're told. It surely does, doesn't it? I've seen it rain on one side of the street, not the other. One field had rain, another had none, and dried up. So here we even have that to happen to us. Now, this next slide, we're not going to particularly like. He brings the clouds to punish men. That's in Job 37:13. He brings the clouds to punish men. That doesn't always work into our plans. I form the light, and I create darkness. I bring prosperity, and I create disaster. I, the Lord, do all these things. That's what we're told in Isaiah. In Job, he unleashes his lightning beneath the whole heaven and sends it to the ends of the earth. Job tells us that. God's voice thunders in marvelous ways. Isn't that a beautiful thought? He does great things beyond our understanding. That's also in Job. There's another thing that we don't particularly like. And it will be, I will punish people for their ways, in Hosea 4:9. And we know people that have lost their homes. We have known people that have lost their lives in storms and tornadoes, in hurricanes and everything. But God's hand is in it, and that's part of his plan. And have you ever noticed that when a part of the country or a city or whatever has a bad storm, how people join together to help them? And you have people bringing their tractors, and you have people bringing their chainsaws, and all these neighbors that they didn't even know are there helping. So see, we use his plan. That we don't have to worry about. We just always have to remember to keep God on his throne, no matter what the weather does to us. Natural disasters can be certainly a challenge, but we must at all times not take God off of his throne. Now the people complain, about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord. And when he heard them, his anger was aroused. That's in Numbers. So when we complain, I think God likes that. It says here his anger was aroused. So does he like us to complain? In Matthew, we find out that he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and unrighteous. We don't know the mystery of God. We do not know all God's plan, nor do we understand it. And that's all right. Now we're going to talk about God's sovereignty over his people. And an area where it has affected all of us, and if it hasn't affected you, it will sometime in your life. There's going to be illness, there's going to be physical afflictions. And both of these are areas where we struggle sometimes to put our trust in God. And we struggle to understand God's sovereignty when this happens to us. But you know, it happens throughout the Bible. Moses had some type of physical ailment that he maybe wasn't a good speaker. And he certainly didn't want to lead the people out of Egypt. And so he said, no, God, don't take me. I can't do this. So God answers Moses concerning his inadequacies of being a poor speaker. The Lord said to him, who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or dumb? Who gives him sight? Or who makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Exodus 4:11. So there's your answer. What about Job? Job was afflicted with painful sores from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And Job did not do anything wrong. But God allowed Satan to test him. But Job proved to be a faithful servant, and he never gave up hope. And then we know what happened to Job in the end. So God has a plan. Sometimes it's hard to find it, an answer to it, or understand it. And we won't ever understand it. It's the mysteries of God. What about Paul? Paul says, and we don't know what his thorn in the flesh was, but here's what he says about it. To keep me from becoming conceited because of these surprisingly great revelations, there was given to me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses. I delight in insults. I delight in hardships. I delight in persecutions. And I delight in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Now, what a wonderful attitude Paul had. 2 Corinthians 11:7-10. Now, we know that physical ailments, behind every physical affliction, is the sovereign purpose of God. Now, this is from Jerry Bridges and his Trust in God that we're using. And so that's what he said. Behind every physical affliction, what is the sovereign purpose of God? And we don't understand that. Donald Gray Barnhouse, a 20th century Bible scholar, said, no person in this world has a physical affliction without God's knowledge and plan. If you do not believe this, you have a strange God who has a universe which has gone out of gear, and he, meaning God, cannot control it. So there is an answer to our physical afflictions that we have, that God is in control, and we must keep our faith and our trust in God. And let's see what Jesus said. about a physical affliction. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. So we know that this man, everyone around would have known he was blind, right? So his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. That's in John 9. In other words, everyone knew this man, he's a man from birth, was blind, and all of a sudden he can see. They've known him since he was a baby. They know this is not any trickery or sorcery. This man can see now. So don't you think that he went around and they said, well, how could you see? And he'd say, Jesus, heal me. And he'd go around and other people, don't you think that would happen? Because it says that so God's work might be displayed in this man's life. That's why it happened. And look at Jesus. We talk about our suffering. Soldiers beat him. Soldiers spat upon him. And he had done nothing but try to save people and heal them and tell us how wonderful life can be when we put our trust in our Heavenly Father. Set a crown of thorns on his head. Soldiers mocked him. Well, and you know, it was awful. In Matthew, even Christ, because he was a man on earth, said, my God, why have you forsaken me? So see, Jesus had a question there. We all have questions. But then he says, not my will, but thy will be done. We get our own answers when we read the Bible, when we know what God wants us to do. God's sovereignty over man. In Lamentations. For men are not cast off by the Lord forever. Though he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love. God will never fail us. He does love us, and sometimes we say, why? But God has an answer. We put our trust in him. Now, another area of struggle for many people are women who cannot bear children, or men who are incompetent. And that's an area of struggle for a lot of couples. And you know them. It's all happened in everybody's family. That just happened. And we say, why? Why is Lord? And I'm sure the women, I was very fortunate, was able to have 2 healthy children. But I'm sure these women that have tried for years and years, and I know some of them, and I don't really question how they're feeling, but I can imagine how they feel. You know, I'm so inadequate and so forth and so on and so on. But God has a purpose, and we have to rely on him sitting on his throne and his sovereignty over us. Because we know in Psalms, for you, God, created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. Is that not beautiful? What we know in Psalms. So yes, God has a plan, and God does. Then we looked in the Bible. Childlessness was the problem, wasn't it? Dale brought up Sarah on Sundays, in Sunday's lesson. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Genesis 29. Another woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. That's in Ruth. And of course, we know Ruth, who had Obed, who just happened to have Jesse, who just happened to have David. And then the lineage to Jesus Christ. So God has a plan. He has a plan for all of us. And even though we don't understand it, and it may take a long time and a lot of hard knocks in between, God's plan. Another woman. Now, we think about this. And because the Lord had closed her womb, does God have a plan? Her rivals kept provoking her in order to irritate her. Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and not forget your servant, but give her a son. And that, of course, is in 1 Samuel 1. But notice, God closed her womb. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. And she named him Samuel, saying, because I asked the Lord for him. That's what his name in 1 Samuel. She asked the Lord for a son. And she had to go through a lot, didn't she? But she never lost her hope. And what about Mary? You know, she was a teenager, according to what we can all understand. Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. And she's just been told she's going to have a son. And she said, I'm not even married. What are people going to think of me? What kind of greeting this might be? But the angel said to her, do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will be with child and give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. That's in it. Now that would be God's mystery, wouldn't it? But we know the plan, but Mary certainly didn't. And what a beautiful plan it was. God is sovereign. Now let's look at nature. Now I love animals, and I love flowers, and I love trees, and I love beautiful sunsets. And I think we're blessed in this part of the country with some beauty. A lot of people do not see the beauty, but I do. So now let's look at God's sovereignty over nature. In Proverbs, we're told that a righteous man cares for the needs of his animals. I can remember my granddad tending to his cows and my dad. And I can remember that a group of men would come over. I think I only know of one time a year. It might have been more. I don't know, but I happened to be there at this time when men would come together and they would butcher some cows, and everybody, all these men would help each other get meat for their families, you know, to put it in their freezers and everything. And my grandfather would say a prayer. Those men would have a prayer out there before they did. And the thing that stuck in my mind, I'll always remember, he said, you can never be angry when you're going to butcher one of God's animals. You know, that always stuck with me. And that's what my granddaddy did. And I just, now as I grow older, I just wish I could, you know, sit on his lap again and tell him, oh, granddaddy, what you taught me. But I sure had sweet memories. Now, for every animal of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. And of course, I had to get some longhorns in there. And he covers the sky with clouds. He supplies the earth with rain, and he makes grass grow on the hills. That's in Psalm. God makes it, and he does it for his animals. What else does he say about his animals? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. You find that out in Matthew. And I love birds too. I actually have a bird, and I couldn't find it, but it would have been a long process for me to try to get a slide of it. But I actually took a picture of a cardinal out in my backyard about 2 years ago. And it's just there picking up little seeds, I guess, from some of my pot plants. I don't know, but it was the prettiest little bird. And I even got a picture of a woodpecker that was on a tree, which the woodpecker was trying to tell me, your tree's dying. It's got bored. But anyway, he was right. I know every bird in the mountains. Psalms tells us. God knows every bird. Every time I see the ducks fly over, I love to watch the ducks fly over in the fall, and then they've already gone now. And you know, how do they know the direction? And look at those lines they create. You know, they fly in a V. They've always got a leader, and I'm thinking, how marvelous! Not one sparrow will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father. It's in Matthew. Okay? Had to get it in. Have to have that West Texas sunset. And just think, what if God hadn't given us the natural resources we found below the earth, and that windmill brings that water up to us? Think God had a plan? What if he hadn't done that? When you lay siege to a city for a long time, do not destroy its trees. Now, this is from Deuteronomy. So God has a plan for our trees. And if you want to know where that tree is, that's one across from Lakeside. It used to be St. Mary's, now it's Lakeside Covenant. That's that tree right there. And it looks just pretty neat to me. Don't destroy your trees by putting an axe to them, because you can eat the fruit. God has a plan. God is sovereign over his nature. What about this? What if we hadn't had natural resources? We would still be having horse and buggy, wouldn't we? What's going to fuel things? God gave us those natural resources under the ground, and we are to care for them, and we are to use them for the benefit of man, but be thankful for what God has given us. What a plan. Oh, it just happened. No, it didn't happen. God made it. God made all creatures, and God saw that it was good in Genesis. And the reason I like this picture of these pronghorn antelopes, my cousin has well, her dad passed away, but now it belongs to all her sisters and herself. They have a farm out by Beulah. It's my granddaddy's old place. And there's actually pronghorn sheep out there now. And I just think it's just marvelous. And they do too. They think it's just something, because the grass in eastern New Mexico has kind of died away some. And so all this grass has been growing in that layout land that farmers put their land in. And it's tall grass, and they've got food. So they just kind of migrate where the food is. And now they're out by Sudan. God controls all the forces of nature. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pens, there are no cattle in the stalls, what? Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in my God and Savior. Habakkuk 3. Well, I hope that I have helped you understand a little bit of God's power over nature, and just be and marvel at what he's done for us. Jerry Bridges, and I'll close with this quote: God sends us each day what he deems best for all creation. Thank you.